Happy Sabbath. So what I did not know was that God was using this army to prepare me for his army. Amen. I grew up in the Hinsdale Church and graduating from Wisconsin Academy. We did not have a lot of money. I did not have a father. We did not use the word college in our house that I ever recall. Academically, I was the bottom 10% of my class, so that would hardly qualify for getting into most colleges. And so when one of my buddies told me our senior year that he was looking to sign up with the Air Force, and then another one told me he was looking to sign up with the Army, I mean, it seemed like kind of a dead-end street after graduating from academy and going back to the Hinsdale Hospital and working around the kitchen for the rest of your life. Not that I don't like food, but I just knew there had to be something else. And so as I explored, it seemed clear to me that the Army might be my best bet. And that was back in 1977. I signed up in Chicago, and we took the bus and drove out to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, well known by most soldiers as Fort Lost in the Woods. I think the two things that I own from my childhood, because I can't think of anything else, is this Bible that my mother gave to me when I was in high school. I don't usually carry this one to church because it just stays in a very special place in my library. But I own this, and every once in a while, I pull out this. It's my diary of when I was in boot camp. My mother had a good friend at the hospital who had been in the Army, and he gave me a lot of insights, made it far more comfortable for me starting off. But there was one thing that he told me, and I would never forget. He said, just don't let them get on a first name basis with you. Well, I was determined to do that until I realized that when you tell them that you're a Seventh-day Adventist and want to have your Sabbaths off, you're pretty well marked. There was nobody else in my battalion. And so here I wrote in my diary, this morning I formed into position with the rest of the men for PT, and suddenly I heard my name yelled out. It was Sergeant Friend calling me out of the formation. I had informed him that I was an SDA. I knew he wouldn't know that unless I told him. And all he asked me was if I was sincere. He told me that a lot of men come in as SDAs only to get out of Saturday PT and duties. And that's how I started my time in boot camp. I started writing the diary because, well, for the first couple Sabbaths, I couldn't go anywhere. I mean, there was nobody to pick me up, and when you're in basic, you just don't go walking off. We learned early what the word AWOL meant and what could happen. Fortunately, I had already lived in a dormitory at Academy, so the barracks life was not a big transition. But at Academy, I had friends. At Academy, there was always something going on Sabbath. You could always talk to somebody. I loved Academy. And those first couple of Sabbaths, they were lonely. And so I would write. Every once in a while, I pull my diary out, and I've never subjected my wife or my daughters to ever having to sit down and listen to me read the whole thing. But once in a while, I read something. I was struck by this when I was reading it again. I wrote down, I awoke and I finally started reading the Bible. I haven't opened it since last school year. Now, I'm going to guess there's probably somebody in this church who has been in that situation. I'm sure I'm not the only one. A few lines down, I wrote, there's not a guy in here who has knocked me for my religion. In fact, they seem quite interested. Maybe it's because they know they can also get Sabbaths off. I felt very proud at the chapel last night. Chaplain Shrek asked if there were any questions. I raised my hand and I asked when we could check with him about meeting our own chaplain, an SDA chaplain. At the end of his answer, he looked at me and he asked what religion I was. I'm not sure how many hundreds of guys were sitting there in that chapel. I told him I was a Seventh-day Adventist, and then he smiled and he told me he had my number and already knew my position. Next, he explained to the brigade. You see, you have platoons, then you have companies, and then you have the brigade. There's a big building, a big chapel. Next, he explained to the brigade exactly what I stood for. Can you imagine? He's never met me. And then he made a comment before the soldiers saying, I have to take my hat off to you for standing alone. I eventually met the chaplain. You might know him. Chaplain Stenbakken. You may have seen him on the Hope Channel. He was the Adventist chaplain there at Fort Leonard Wood. Quite a man of God. As I told you, I didn't grow up with a father, and so over those weeks in basic training, seeing him on the weekends and talking about guns, talking about what Adventists believe, asking questions I guess I had not asked before, like, so which meats are clean and which ones are not clean? Well, he picked me up. He took me to church. The only item I could have going into basic was my Bible. I did not know it, but the Adventist Church also provides a Bible kit for service people. And so I received one of these. And since my mother had given me that Bible, I was able to take this smaller Bible with me when we went out to the field. Didn't want to get that one muddy. And then there's all kinds of good information in here. What Seventh-day Adventists believe, how to share the Bible, the military and non-combatancy. I have a couple friends who just recently joined the military, and so I contacted the conference and asked if I could get a couple new of these. You know, once a year we have an offering for service people. Maybe the next time you hear that offering, you'll think of what I shared with you today, and you'll want to support our service people. Well, I had a roommate, and his name was Steve. And I wrote here in my diary, talking to Steve this morning, I found that he took a little reading in my Insight last night. That's great. You know, you never know. You just never know when you leave literature laying around. You never know who's going to read it. You never know what's going to do for them. I didn't press religion on my roommate, and so when he shared with me that he had picked up my Insight, I was quite delighted. But then there was this. And this was challenging. I called Mom late this afternoon, and it sure felt great to talk to her. After we were done talking, and she said all the usual about being proud of me, she asked me why I finally decided to remain an Adventist. And I wrote, I'll really have to weigh out my mind on this one. You see, by the time I had gone to the military, my mother was already beginning to separate from the church. She had been hurt. At a critical time in her life, the church just didn't have the right answer for her. And so here's a mother writing to her 18-year-old son, why have you decided? Going through my diary this week, I was reminded of something that was kind of cool. I wrote here, they needed 2 representatives to represent the platoon for complaints or anything else that the platoon might like to see changed. Now, isn't that something? You wouldn't necessarily think that you can go into the Army and then make suggestions. But that's what they did. My name was the first one brought up by my platoon, by my roommate and some of his friends. Nevertheless, I was picked to be one of the two, and tomorrow I go to see the captain. Can you imagine what complaint an Adventist might have in the Army? I told you I like food. My own complaint is about the pork and the vegetables. And then I write, that has to stop. It did. It did. We met with the captain who was in charge of whatever. And I pointed out, I said, and I don't recall bringing religion into it, at least not initially. But I mean, I pointed out, I said, you go through line and you have the meat and you get to the vegetables and you have more meat. Shouldn't you have like meat and vegetables? I remembered a few things from the back in academy. I remembered that Jews did not eat pork. And as I recall, that was my backup to the captain. You have Jewish people. And the surprising thing was, the other guys in the circle felt the same way. And so, through the remainder of basic, and I don't know how long after that, we had vegetables, pork-free. You never know how God is going to use you. I was totally shocked today. Major. I always thought this was cool. Here's a guy whose name is Major, but he's not a major. Major, a young trainee that I have been centralizing my religion on. I was almost afraid when I read those words. I mean, I don't know if that sounds real good, but apparently there was something about him that I liked, and I focused on him. Major, a young trainee that I have been centralizing my religion on, came up to me and asked if he could talk some more about Seventh-day Adventist. And a few lines later I write, I definitely felt happier and more blessed deciding to stay with God and what He wants. And then I was reminded of my drill sergeant asking me if I was sincere. Let's see, this is October 8, 1977. It's Sabbath. I arrived at church and there were two other trainees, but they were new ones. Not one of the three from the Sabbath before were there. Is it always like this? Maybe this is why a drill sergeant friend asked me if I was sincere. Maybe this is one reason why it gets hard for Adventists to always get off on their Sabbaths. A few days later I wrote, I've been studying my lesson rather diligently, and I'm very happy now that I'm getting myself totally back in communication with God. I like the diary because it tells me how I was thinking at the age of 18. Well, I did spend 2 semesters at Broadview Academy. Most of my friends from Hinsdale went to Broadview. And Broadview was where my buddies first introduced me to the idea of going into the Army. And so I wrote here, if and when I get a chance to talk to the guys back at Broadview Academy, I'll sure have plenty to say. especially about religion. You are or are not a Seventh-day Adventist. Not just an SDA, but an SDA Christian. There is a difference. It's true, isn't it? I continue to write, it's a real-life missionary field here with more opportunities than anywhere else. Here are men who have, in their last attempts, tried to find something that would be of benefit to their lives. I realized that I was not the only one graduating from high school and just not knowing, where do you go next? What do you do next? What purpose is there? Well, tonight, while in the process of shaping up my locker, I talked for about an hour to one of the trainees about the Sabbath, about those who keep Sunday, and in Christ's resurrection. Believe me, it kept me on my toes. The following day was Sabbath. Today the sermon was by the chaplain himself, and then we went to his house and ate. And that afternoon he baptized one of the trainees. After watching the baptism, I decided that I'm going to write the Hinsdale Church and ask the pastor about rededicating my life to God. Religion has never before meant so much to me. We stood in the pay line all morning. Bring home pay was $294 after taxes. 77, right? It rained for portions of the morning, and soon a rainbow appeared. Some of the guys were totally surprised when I explained the meaning of the rainbow. And a few lines down I wrote, I had a good hour's talk with some of the guys tonight about different things about the Bible. You wouldn't believe how many people do not know what tithe is. I was a little stunned and lost on where to start. I finished basic training, and like every other soldier, I went on to AIT, which is Advanced Individual Training. I went in to be a 63B mechanic. My wife kids me about that to this day. Yeah, can't even do an oil change. Of course, the manly response is if I had the right kind of garage, I could. My friend from Basic was also a 63B, Leon. So we became bunkmates in AIT. We're still at Fort Lost in the Woods. We've just moved over to the AIT section. Leon had been interested all along. It was pretty neat and basic because we would sit in a circle. I mean, everybody had to polish their boots at night. Everybody had to polish their brass at night. And so we would take the Sabbath School lesson guide, and then one guy would read it, and we'd go around. I mean, We could blow a week and a half an hour and be moving on. They were having an evangelistic series down the road in Rolla, Missouri. Leon wanted to go with me. They wouldn't give him permission to go to all the nights because he was not an Adventist. And so at nighttime, I would come back, lights would go out, and Leon would wait for me to get my flashlight and the materials, and there beside our bed, we would study in the dark. He really wanted to know the truth. And I had the pleasure of watching Leon be baptized. AIT was finished. My first assignment was Fort Benning, Georgia, infantry school, jump school. I arrived on a Friday afternoon. 3 of us went in before the captain. We were introduced to the company. And then he told us he would see us the next morning, Saturday morning at the motor pool. And as the other 2 were leaving the room, I turned back to the captain and I told him I was a Seventh-day Adventist. And his response was something to the effect of, "I don't care what you are, I'll see you tomorrow morning." I was stunned. Basic and AIT have been so much easier. And I was scared. It was about 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon. I shot across the baseball field over to the chaplain's office fast. I got over there. I told him I was an Adventist. I told him what the captain said. The sergeant in charge is what you would call a chaplain's assistant. And in a few short words, he pointed out to me that they had lost all 3 of their assistants over the previous weeks and months. It was down to just him. And so he asked me, "Would you like to go OJT here?" My vocabulary wasn't that big. I didn't know what OJT meant. He said, "We'll train you to be a chaplain's assistant, and you won't have to worry about your Sabbaths." God is good. And so I worked for 3 bosses that probably none of you have ever worked for. Certainly not at the same time. But my 3 bosses were a Catholic, Episcopalian, and Baptist pastor. And that was really perfect, because it gave me 2 years outside of academy, outside of my little religious world there of Hinsdale, to learn about other people's religions. Well, the Army sent me papers and informed me after 2 years that I was being sent to Germany. So I arrived over at Heilbronn, and I brought a letter with me, a letter that explained that I had OJT for the last 2 years as a 71 Mike, a chaplain's assistant. Had spent no time in the motor pool since AIT training. I showed the letter to my captain. He said, "I have no authority over this. You're a 63 Bravo. You need to go over and talk to the battalion commander. Scared. I got over there, I showed the battalion commander the letter, I explained my circumstances, and basically it just kind of went back and forth like, I need people in my motor pool. Do you understand that? Yes, sir, I do. And I understand you need Sabbaths off. Yes, sir, I do. And I understand you're willing to work on Sundays if called in. Yes, I will. I don't see a problem. Do you see a problem? No, sir. And I went to the motor pool, which was actually a blessing because I didn't have to work on weekends. Oh, I can't imagine they probably called me in more than 3 Sundays over the 2 years. And so I was able to travel. And as I traveled around Europe, suddenly those things that I had heard about back in academy, history, religious history, I mean, now it was just all coming to life. I don't know about today, but back then, as long as you were flying in Europe, you didn't have to pay for a flight. It was called a military hop. And I thought, well, this is just so cool. Just go anywhere. So I drove up to Ramstein Air Base there in Germany, and I said, what's your next flight going out? They said, it's going to Aviano, Italy. Okay. And I hopped on. I arrived down to Aviano, Italy, and said, what flights do you have going out? We're going to Israel. For free. I was on that flight. It was really neat, though, my time in Germany, because Michael Major, whose name I mentioned to you earlier, we met up again in Germany. Apparently, he really enjoyed our time studying back in basic. He spent the next 2 years going to the local Adventist church with me in Germany. Oh, and by the way, just so you don't make the same mistake I do, I knew nothing about German. And so when I got there, I was looking for a church that would be open on Saturday. And I had the little German Wörterbuch, it takes you from English to German and back and forth. And so for the first couple of weeks, I was going around asking everybody, wo ist, where is the big, große Kirche? I was getting nowhere. And it wasn't until I finally hooked up with the Adventist church over there in Heilbronn. And I told them, I said, well, I've been here for a few weeks. I've been looking for the church up and down everywhere. Wo ist die große Kirche? And my German friend Thomas, he started laughing. He said, Jim, the word is Kirche, not Kirche. You've been walking around asking, where's the big cherry for all those weeks? Pronounce it right. Pronounce it right. Well, I told you I was the bottom 10% of my class academically. College would have been out. Except someone brought to my attention one day, they said, hey, you're from Illinois. You get free college if you go back to Illinois. No way. And so, when I left the Army, I went to Western Illinois, went into law enforcement administration. But my mother's question still hung over me. Why are you sticking with the church? And so I did something. Most of you have sat in evangelistic meetings and you've watched as they have put the slides up here about Sabbath and words from different authors and different books over history. I learned about the interlibrary loan there at Western. that you could literally get your hand on any book around the United States. And so I spent 2 years acquiring every book that I could possibly find from any evangelistic material. I wanted to see it myself. And at the end of 2 years there being at Western, the Adventist pastor told me, he says, Andrews University has a program coming up, and it's for anybody who is in a public college to come out to the Andrews campus. And so I came. And I went back to Western after that, and I knew that the people who I was hanging around with and partying with would not be the best mother for my children. It was not easy walking away from 2 more years of free college education. But I had gone through my probation at Western. My grades were good. Andrews found a way for me to be able to come over and attend. Had it not been for that, I would not have met my wife, Vicki. Some things in life are worth a lot more than money, aren't they? Remember Leon, who was baptized? He came and he visited Vicki and I while we were students at Andrews. He was now married. He was now an elder in his church. Beautiful wife who was a nurse. And so we reminisced. I sent Leon a Facebook message this week. Haven't spoken to him probably in about 3 years. But I sent him a Facebook message knowing that I was going to talk about the military, and I said, Leon, how are you? Are you still serving as an elder of the Fulton Church? I'm speaking about my military experience this weekend, and I've had you in my mind. And here's what he wrote. Yes, I'm still an elder. I saw Linda. Linda was a lady from the church back there in the Rolla area who was a singer in the church. I saw Linda this last weekend at church. She talked about Fort Leonard Wood and seeing me grow up in the Lord over the years. I included you in that conversation. Told her that it was you who started reading the Bible in your room during basic training that got me thinking about what the Bible said, and that I had never heard anything like it. How it piqued my interest to listen to more. And then he wrote this. But Satan was trying to keep me away by giving me bad headaches when you would read the Bible. So I would have to leave the room until the headaches went away. Take care. And I do think of you also, even after all these years. No idea where this would lead me in life. But now you know why I love the Bible so much. So if you're expecting a Revelation sermon today, I apologize. Here's one of my favorite songs. I think you know it. The Bible, yes, that's the book for me. I stand alone on the word of... Stand with me. The Bible, Yes, that's the book for me. I stand alone on the Word of God, the Bible. Oh, dear God, if we could all look back over our diaries, we would have so many reasons to praise you. May we all be faithful soldiers in your army. May we all be serious about your word, the Bible. Go with us. Give us the courage to open our mouths. Give us the words when we need them. Lead us with your Spirit. Empower us with your Spirit. And guide us. I pray all this in the lovely name of Jesus. Amen.